Welcome back to the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Coates. Join me along with industry leaders and friends on a quest to get more people through the gym door and eating and living healthier. Join me where evidence meets empathy while rejecting fitness industry fads and extremism. Let's begin. Dr. Lauren Colenso-Semple. This is something I've been looking forward to. Your social media has been sensational. I think it's taking the industry by storm. And you are a PhD of integrative physiology. You got a master's in exercise science. You're actively involved in research. You've got a strong background in fitness and training. And you're the co-owner of Mass Research Review, which is a prestigious entity in our space. So quite the resume. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Good. All right, let's dive right in. I've got some goodies. So I pulled a lot of the stuff from your social media, but we had a little exchange on something we saw on social media. When you hear someone talk about, quote, balancing hormones, is there a charitable interpretation here, or is this straight nonsense?
This is such nonsense. And these, quote unquote, hormone balancing coaches are just trying to scam people. If our hormones were balanced, we would probably be losing function. So hormone fluctuations, whether it's throughout the day or throughout a given menstrual cycle, or in response to a meal, or in response to exercise, all of those are normal and necessary.
What are the hormones they're talking about? I'm assuming, because this language tends to go towards women, so I assume we're talking about estrogen, progesterone, that sort of stuff. I'm sure cortisol is probably lumped in there. What else?
Yeah, those are the big ones. Basically that, your reproductive function is somehow being destroyed by the way that you're eating or the way that you're training or your pre-post workout nutrition. And also that cortisol is, something to be feared and is incredibly concerning, and that we need to be very mindful of these acute increases in cortisol.
Are there any lifestyle behaviors that actually do have adverse effects on some of these hormones or other things?
Yes. If you're in a state of true low energy availability, then you can lose your menstrual cycle. And there are various downstream health effects that are really problematic if you are in a true state of low energy availability. So we're talking about people who are dieting down for the bodybuilding stage, or maybe dancers and gymnasts, figure skaters. Those types of athletes are more prone to this low energy availability, meaning the energy you are expending from exercise is greater than your energy consumption relative to your lean mass. So it's not really the same as a calorie deficit, but there are, like I said, it's not good for you. There are a whole lot of downstream health concerns if you are in a true state of low energy availability. Again, this doesn't apply to the general population. This doesn't apply to your average person. So in terms of cortisol, there are health conditions, either chronically elevated cortisol or chronically low cortisol. Both of those are a problem. Those are associated with health conditions like Cushing's, Addison's, anorexia, a pituitary tumor. You might have issues with cortisol that are a symptom of some underlying condition that needs to be addressed, but again, not relevant for the healthy population.
This episode is brought to you by Renaissance Periodization and the RP Hypertrophy app. RP is the industry leader in muscle building, coaching, and education. And this app is like having a coach in your pocket. It gives you everything you need, including training programs, form videos. It gives you all your sets, reps, and weights, so you just show up and follow the plan. It adjusts each week based off your progress. And the app was created by Dr. Mike Isertel, Nick Shaw, and the team at RP, who I've known for many years. And the entire team are incredible people who've always been supportive and generous with me, so I know their character and are easy to endorse. My library contains several RP books, and I've used RP training principles in my workouts and coaching with my clients for many years, long before the explosion in popularity of their YouTube channel, which is worth checking out. RP is the first sponsor I felt remotely comfortable endorsing after over 7 years of podcasting. And if hiring a one-on-one coach isn't for you, using the RP Hypertrophy app is the next best thing to maximize your gains and take the guesswork out of your program. And there's a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can try it risk-free. If you don't like it, they'll give you your money back. And I've also got a serious discount for you of up to $50 US. go to rpstrength.com/coats and use the code COATSRP, or go to the link below in the show notes, and that's rpstrength.com/coats. Use the code COATSRP.
I always get these mixed up. So which one is the one where there's too much cortisol and what's happening? Which one is the one where there's too little cortisol and what's happening?
Cushing's is elevated, chronically elevated, and that's typically due to steroid-based medications, and it's just kind of a mismanagement of the dose, and it kind of happens by accident. And but a lot of it's true that if you have Cushing's, you can have this weight gain or redistribution of body fat, but that has been sort of pulled from and extrapolated to the general population, and people are trying to explain, belly fat gain as a result of cortisol fluctuations, and then various remedies are proposed, usually some sort of supplement that will fix this, quote unquote.
So what's really going on with women? Because we obviously have, a massive cohort of women who are hearing the language of balance your hormones. They're not feeling good. Why aren't they feeling good? And here's what I've always extrapolated. It's that they're obviously probably consuming too many calories. They're not active enough. They're probably not sleeping great. And there's probably too much alcohol or some combination of those four things, and they're interacting with each other. And then maybe through whatever interventions, they start working out more. Their nutrition improves. Maybe their sleep improves. They start feeling better, and then they credit it to either the supplements or the coach who's balancing their hormones. Is that a bit of what's going on? Can you elaborate?
Perhaps. I mean, I've never really interacted with one of these people other than the hate they spew in my direction online. But a lot of it is some sort of, you need to train or eat around your menstrual cycle if you're pre-menopausal, and that really all of these lifestyle adjustments need to be made according to menstrual cycle phase. And then if we're talking about menopause transition, then it's your decrease in estrogen is wreaking havoc on your bones, your muscle. It's making you gain fat, and we need hormone therapy, or we need a supplement stack, or we need an anti-inflammatory diet. So I would say those are typically the messages for pre and then peri or post menopause.
You mentioned menstrual cycle stuff. So we're hearing a lot, for a while we've been hearing a lot of people making claims about how you're supposed to adjust your training to your menstrual cycle, and you just referenced nutrition as well. Now, seems like the prevailing evidence, I've seen you talk about this, I've seen Dr. Lane Norton talk about this, lots of other people, that there just isn't evidence to support the idea of adjusting. Now, I'll preface that by saying that I know that when it comes to menopause and women's hormonal cycles, monthly cycles, a lot of stuff is highly individual. And probably, I would like to say the best evidence is for each woman to just know what works for her body. But what's the evidence saying across populations?
So I like to separate this into two conversations. One is about menstrual symptoms. So when you have your period, either a couple days before or the first couple days of your cycle, the majority of women will have some sort of symptoms, like menstrual cramps, bloating, lower back pain, fatigue, something along those lines. And it's completely fine on the 1 or 2 days that you have symptoms to adjust your training session or skip the gym altogether. But these cycle phased based programs are saying some version of exercise like this for week 1, exercise like that for week 2, exercise a whole other way for week 3. And that might mean changing the intensity of the training. It might mean avoiding lifting weights altogether. It might mean literally resting and doing light yoga and stretching for a week. There are various iterations of this as it's promoted online. And I assessed muscle protein synthesis in response to exercise in each of these phases, looking at specific hormone profiles. There were no differences. So the idea that, this estrogen peak is anabolic or progesterone is catabolic, it's not true. There are no differences in protein synthesis. There are no differences in protein breakdown. So I think we need to ignore these types of programs and also just acknowledge that consistency is key, whatever your goal is. So there's nothing productive about drastically switching up your training on a week-to-week basis. You will end up spinning your wheels, and progress is going to take so much longer.
This episode is brought to you by Just Bite Me Meals. I work long days and I won't compromise my client experience or sacrifice my workout, sleep, or nutrition. So I needed a quality and reliable meal prep service so I could save time on cooking and shopping and have more time for the stuff that matters. Net out the cost of groceries, and the service isn't as much as you might think. And regular impulsive food delivery apps, eating out, that costs way more anyway. I get more meal variety and less dishes to clean, and I've been referring clients to Just Bite Me Meals for a long time, and I recently started ordering myself. Food is great. The beef brisket tacos are my favorite so far, and there's a lot of menu choice. Your calories and macros are listed. The portions are great. You can order custom meals. They deliver to your door, or you can pick up from their storefront. And I'm sorry to listeners outside of Alberta, but Just Bite Me Meals is currently just in Edmonton, Calgary, Grand Prairie, and Fort McMurray. Ordering from Just Bite Me Meals made my life easier instantly. And you can get 10% off on all your orders using my code, Andrew Coates Fitness, all caps, on their website. That's Andrew Coates Fitness, all capitals, or go to the link and the code in the show notes.
And you said there was sort of a second part of that conversation.
So there's the symptoms, and which I say auto-regulate, treat symptoms as you would any other ailment or life stressor that is going to affect your training. The reality is we don't all feel our best or perform our best every single session of every single month, whether we're a man or a woman, whether we're older or younger. That's just life. And so the idea that we should treat the menstrual cycle any differently doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because there are so many individual differences in that kind of lived experience. And then when we try to start saying your hormone profile is X and therefore you should be doing Y or avoiding Z, people who say this have absolutely no understanding of the variability in the hormone fluctuation, timing, and magnitude throughout a given cycle. I can tell you, it's not one size fits all. You don't feel when you're ovulating. You don't feel that your estradiol is high or your progesterone is high. We don't subjectively sense these hormone fluctuations. And so we're trying to sort of put these cookie cutter programs into our lives, and people are making drastic adjustments around, either macronutrient splits or the types of training that they're doing. And it's all so overly complicated and potentially really detrimental, because like I said, it's going to hinder your progress if you're just randomly switching things up.
That makes a lot of sense. I've also heard rumblings, and I don't know where the evidence lies here, about potential differences in injury risk across a monthly cycle. Is there any validity there?
Yeah. So what I just said about all that variability, this is one of the major flaws in some of this research, because some of the papers that are published just say, you know what, most women have a 28-day cycle. Most women ovulate right in the middle. So here's your follicular phase, here's your luteal phase, and we'll just assume all of those things. We won't measure hormones. We won't track cycles. We won't track ovulation. And then we're going to take self-report injury data and try to fit it into one of these boxes. And that's why when you actually look at different papers on injuries, the data is all over the place. I can pull a paper right now that says around ovulation is, the time you're most injurious. Oh, at the end of the cycle. No, it's at the beginning of the cycle. It's when hormones are high. It's when hormones are low. It's all over the place. And I think what's really problematic about this in the athletic space is it gives coaches and dietitians this out, because instead of looking hard at the training and the recovery and the nutrition, we're blaming the menstrual cycle.
That makes a lot of sense, because that's one of those things that I wasn't clear on. Because then I start to think, and maybe you could comment on this, are there any potential injury mechanisms by hormones affecting, let's say, connective tissue?
Potentially, but not when you think about the time during which these hormone fluctuations are taking place. So let's say we remove estrogen altogether, and they do this in rodent models where you remove the ovaries of a rodent and you can basically shut down hormone production, and there are negative effects of doing that. But when we look at a menstrual cycle, the hormones are fluctuating every couple of days. And so the idea that the effect would be so dramatic and so swift over such a short period of time, when we're talking about slow turnover in these tissues, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense when you think about it practically.
That's brilliant. So I love that because I always try to think, okay, there's the research and then there's how I understand mechanisms of how things work. And sometimes to me, a mechanism so obvious that the research to me seems a little bit dubious. I don't have a specific example, but in this case, you just made the mechanism make so much sense as to debunk what I even thought might have been possible. So best answer I think I've ever heard to a question on this podcast. All right, slight detour for a bit, but this is all related. You've been super busy. Like I really want people to go follow you. Okay. I always endorse at the end, but you are debunking rapid fire, just the nonsense that's out there. And it's so resonant. So it definitely feels like for quite a while, there are a lot of popular podcasts where there's a lot of experts, pseudo experts, people with the appearance of authority, no appearance of authority are going on and they're making a lot of claims about women's training, nutrition, menopause. We've seen it recently. And what do you think is happening where these popular health, wellness, and adjacent podcasts are platforming these type of people? Again, the ones that appear to be credentialed, and they're making misleading, outright false, or just poorly supported claims. Why is this happening?
It's so unfortunate. And I think it's just the nature of you can sell more books or supplements or products or courses if you have a really polarizing message or a fear-based message. And it's really, really unfortunate that these big podcasts are platforming these people and their messaging because it's so confusing for women. And it means that we're forgetting about the basics that really work when it comes to training and nutrition and fat loss, muscle growth. And so we're going down these kind of rabbit holes of overemphasizing things that really don't work or are the last 1% of what might make a real difference.
What do you say to the woman who is listening to this and she's going, no, like, I don't feel great. It's my hormones. Like, what's probably going on with her? I mean, obviously things are highly individual, but how do you take her and say, you know what? These people are misleading you. They're playing upon your frustrations, how you feel, and how can we steer that person in a different direction?
If it sounds too good to be true, it is. If it sounds overly complicated, that's misleading because the basics are actually really easy to explain. Even with complicated physiology, explaining it, translating it in a practical way that you can logically get is really not that difficult. And so when people go on these podcasts or social media and you hear all these big words and all of this, and you just kind of take their word for it because at the end of all of that mumbo jumbo, they said, and therefore you should never train fasted, or therefore calories in, calories out don't work, or, whatever the message tacked on to the end. If we're going to make big claims about you should always do this or you should never do that, we need to have a really, really solid base of evidence in humans that actually measures the outcome we're discussing. So if we're talking about fat loss, if we're talking about muscle growth, if we're talking about muscle loss, if we're talking about bone health, we need to have these long-term studies where they did this or they did that, and there was a significant difference, and therefore, this changes the recommendation. And even if there were one study, that wouldn't be enough because, as evidence-based people, we want to look at the literature as a whole. But the problem is people are pulling sort of potential mechanisms or looking at single pathways or looking at rodent data and then kind of crafting this narrative that totally switches how we always thought about training and nutrition, and are saying because you are a woman, you've been doing it all wrong and you should stop doing this and start doing this and focus on this and worry about all of these nuances. And that is really, really disappointing because they're not using proper evidence to support those really big deal claims.
Why are they getting away with it? I mean, we know that they're coming under fire, but they're effectively getting away with it. They're being rewarded. And I've seen, little preface, I have observed now there are people that I enjoy, and they're certain, very picky about like the big podcasts, very picky. There's certain people I enjoy and respect who I think are doing on average a really, really good job. But it seems like every time one of them comes under fire, I actually will, this is a little bit of a side tangent, but it's a good example. Jay Shetty. There's a lot of people who are big fans of Jay Shetty, and Jay is part of that world. Jay has come under legitimate criticism. He was outed, like mountains of evidence about him plagiarizing virtually every that nice, charismatic spoken word thing that he blew up on Facebook when they first did video, right? All came out, didn't acknowledge it, but now apparently credits everything. And there was a big article, you can Google this in The Guardian. I'm trying to remember, I think his name is John McDermott, I think, was the one who wrote it. Did a lot of research, and Shetty there's been always questions about whether or not he was really a monk. Apparently that's a very overblown claim. But also his school that was on his website, his life school, had claims that it was affiliated with several major universities. All those universities were contacted. None of them had any knowledge record, anything in their system. They weren't associated with them. And then when this came out, all of a sudden the website drops all these things. And there was all these big red flags and all these, borderline, the guy is basically built as a total fraud is what it appears to be. And I think there's a lot of evidence to support that. But yet he's never acknowledged any of these things, makes little pivots, but just continues to operate on, sell his books, people celebrate him. And I think it's one of the more egregious examples, but similar figures seem to just skate by not acknowledging criticism.
You're right. And I think in the time of social media, if you've already built up such a big fan base, such a big following, it's sort of like you have your tribe, if you will, and they will stand by you no matter what. And it no longer becomes about critical thinking or the evidence and becomes about, no, I love this person and I will ignore even, very obvious evidence to the contrary.
Cognitive dissonance, plain as day.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned losing muscle faster. So this is one, you've had a couple of posts on this. One of them was, you were responding to the claim, women who train fasted lose muscle. And you're like, false. And then there's a couple other related things. So what's the evidence actually saying here?
Fasted training is a tool. It's an option. Sometimes people prefer it because they train early in the morning and maybe they have some GI issues if they eat right before the gym. It doesn't cause muscle loss. It doesn't cause fat accumulation. It doesn't increase fat loss for that matter. So, we need to be really measured about how we discuss fasting. It's fine. It's not a magic tool. It can help people create a calorie deficit because you shorten your eating window. But I don't know why we're demonizing fasting. You hear various claims about you're going to immediately lose muscle if you train fasted. No, resistance training is building muscle. And we don't lose muscle in a given workout. That's not how it works. A resistance training session stimulates protein synthesis, and then we maximize that by eating protein, consistently and sufficiently throughout the day. But all of these nuances and messaging around nutrient timing that are for some reason specifically directed towards women, there's just no evidence for it.
We can kind of go to the mechanism, like you said before about the timeline. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I understand muscle building is we're always building muscle and breaking down muscle. It is the net balance of what is occurring across a timeline. So again, over a shorter window like that, it really doesn't matter. It's almost like a good analogy, I think, is the calories you consume across a week. If someone's like really stressed out because they overconsume calories on one given day, kind of blew it in their mind. Well, you amortize that over the rest of the week and it's not a big deal. It's not like the fat you gain because you went over that one day. That's it. It's permanent. You can't get rid of it. As long as those calories net out to be what you need across a week or longer timeline, you're generally fine.
It's also not like every morning when we wake up, the body just resets and there's no, if we had dinner the night before, then we aren't running on empty, right? So I think there's just sort of this misunderstanding that there's something magic about a 24-hour period because we just use that for convenience of being able to talk about grams of protein per day or calorie targets per day. But these systems never shut down. It's constantly, you and I sitting here right now, maybe we are catabolic because for this snapshot in time. Does that mean anything? Of course not. If you're training fasted and maybe you're using more fat as fuel, does that mean you're going to lose more body fat if you consistently train fasted over time? No. So all of these messages about like short-term snapshots in, are we, anabolic or catabolic? Is protein synthesis currently elevated? Is metabolism currently elevated more so than the past hour? All of these are not informative of long-term adaptations, and the long-term adaptations are what we care about. We care about muscle growth. We care about fat loss. We care about strength gain. And so looking at these sort of acute snapshots is not helpful and can be harmful, because if it's just shifting the way people behave, and there are downstream effects of overcomplicating training and nutrition that could mean people end up not doing the big things that matter, like consistency, like progressive overload, what have you. That's the real problem with some of these messages.
You seem so measured and poised the way you deliver all this stuff. Do you ever see something, people send you videos, like some latest bullshit claim on a podcast, you want to throw your phone across the room, or do you just kind of like pause, take a big deep breath and go, okay, cool, time to get to work and create something for social media? How do you handle this stuff?
I want to throw my phone across the room at least weekly. I mean, I went on Gabrielle Lyon's podcast recently, and we had what I thought was an excellent, measured, science-based conversation. And the amount of vitriol I received from women online was just, it was so shocking that it was funny. Like, I couldn't even really be offended because people were so angry at me for saying these things weren't that important, or saying that actually men and women were kind of similar in the way we adapt to exercise and in the behaviors we need to adopt to promote fat loss. And isn't this good news? It's not complicated. It's really simple. And apparently that's not good news because, it's anti-feminist and I'm a shill for the patriarchy. And all of that was, like half funny, but also half, I don't know the word, like just disappointing that there's that many people out there that think this way. Yeah.
Do you think, so this made me think of something, this probably makes sense. Do you think that one of the reasons why people want to buy into the idea of complexity is because it makes it harder? It's a very socially acceptable victim narrative to say, well, here are all these complex reasons why I'm not, as feeling as good as I want to be. I'm not as lean as I want to be. I'm not as active as I want to be. Do you think that's kind of what's going on?
I think when you overcomplicate it, it sounds like you have this secret, you have this magic tool. And so the reality is that building muscle, losing fat, it takes time. It's not that easy. You have to be patient. And people don't like that. So they want a quicker fix than the, quote unquote, boring basics. And so I think that resonates. I also think, and you asked about this earlier, so I do want to dovetail back to it. When we think about specifically women who are in the menopause transition, this is a perfect storm of confusion and changes in body composition, and it probably inadvertent changes in diet and physical activity. But we don't necessarily understand all of what's going on. And so you can say, well, clearly what used to work for me isn't working anymore. And so I need something new. I need something drastically different. When in reality, I think most women aren't taking into account the full picture of, did something change in how I'm eating? Or did something change in my overall physical activity? Or do I have really debilitating symptoms that are preventing me from getting proper sleep on a nightly basis that have these downstream effects that are obviously going to affect my diet and my motivation to train and probably my overall physical activity. And so I think instead of really taking an audit of what's going on, a lot of these women are just eager to find this next solution. And these influencers who, as you said, are seemingly credentialed, are right there waiting in the wings to sell it to them.
I want to elaborate on that, but a quick note. You mentioned being on, and I saw this, you're on Gabrielle Lyon's podcast. Gabrielle's great. We spoke at something back in 2022. My friend Kenny Santucci's Strong New York. I got to meet Gabrielle. She's a lovely human. And I think she does a really good job. By the way, she has agreed to come on this podcast. Just got to make the scheduling work. So she's super. But I think she does a really good job of focusing on the big rocks. Her talking points, everything is eat protein, build muscle, right? Every once in a while, like you can catch people, you can tease out clips of something they say on a, like Dr. Mike Israel. God love him. People will just try to like tease out little like things that Mike might be just talking some random shit that Mike talks about. And then they zero in and look, this is this weird thing. It's like, no, Mike is for years been creating like, muscle hypertrophy and other like health promoting behaviors. And I think Gabrielle is wonderful for that. So I love seeing you on a big platform like that. So back to the menopause thing. So menopause misinformation. Holy shit, that's wild. It felt like up until maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, it's almost like no one was talking about it. There was almost like no information, or it seemed like there was not much research. And then all of a sudden people figured out, wait a second, there's this enormous cohort of people who are better fitness consumers, who have money, who are frustrated. And then, I mean, that to me is kind of the explanation why everybody went in there. So we have some really credible people. I'd love to hear who some of your favorite people are. I mean, I love your media. I am bringing Amanda Thebe is booked for the podcast. Amanda's great. Dr. Jen Gunter is one of the ones that I keep hearing again and again. There's some other figures that I don't want to name, but I get the impression they're a little hit or miss, and I hear different things. But what the hell is going on? Why is this? Why the explosion of bad info?
I think you nailed it. If you're seeing a message where it's constantly fear-based, you're broken, you need to be fixed. I have this solution for you, an overemphasis on supplements, an overemphasis on weighted vests, an overemphasis on a specific menopause diet. These are not the things we should be focusing on, because the issue here is that we then forget to mention the things that really work, like resistance training, like a calorie deficit, like overall physical activity, because putting out that message doesn't make these people money.
So, well, let's go to the weighted vest first. So I love this because the mechanism keeps coming up. So I want to take people through something, because you've been debunking weighted vest stuff. I think your last post on social media might have been about weighted vests. And I've read Michael Easter's book, The Comfort Crisis, which I think is wonderful. James Krieger's a friend, him and Eric Salazar, they did an N=1, just Eric training for a bodybuilding show years ago, where they continue to increase the weight of the weighted vest as he dropped weight in the comp, and it seemed to elevate his metabolism. We'll come back to that. But I've seen a lot, and I was thinking, wow, weighted vests make so much sense for maintaining bone mineral density on the surface. But then I thought about it, because I'm seeing people saying, no, it's not. And it's like, but it's the magnitude of the stimulus to create an adaptation. You're nodding yes. That's what I figured out. It's like, okay, it's probably just not enough. And so therefore, resistance training makes most sense. Can you actually explain that in more detail?
That's right. It is, it does sort of make sense in theory. But when we actually look at the data, whether we're talking about bone density or attenuating muscle loss or promoting fat loss, all of those outcomes, first, these studies, women or men wearing weighted vests for 8 to 10 hours per day. So this is not going on a 30-minute walk wearing your weighted vest. This is literally constantly wearing a weighted vest.
And Eric, sorry for interrupting, but when James and Eric did this thing, I don't think Eric took the weighted vest off the entire time. And that's not realistic. Sorry. 100%.
So I think, and no one ever mentions that really important piece of it here. We're talking about a really, really extreme intervention. And then we also have to look at a study that, yes, they wore a weighted vest and they were doing jumping exercises. And the comparison group did absolutely nothing. And so exercise with a weighted vest, really anything physically active, is going to be better than doing nothing. And so that's not an appropriate comparison. It's not an appropriate reference point. The other thing we need to keep in mind is the magnitude of the outcome of interest compared to alternatives. Because if you're going to say, well, yes, these people slightly lost a bit more fat than these other people, but you could just go in so there's two fat loss studies, for example. One was calorie deficit. The other was calorie deficit plus weighted vest. Both groups lost approximately 11 kilograms, no difference between groups. So the weighted vest did nothing. When we look at another study where it was a heavy or a light weighted vest, again, wearing it all day long, the group wearing the heavy weighted vest lost about 1.6 kilos and the light vest lost 0.3. This is not like meaningful weight loss, that it's worth this sort of sacrifice of constantly wearing a weighted vest. So I think, unfortunately, the message is being promoted and these studies are really being misrepresented because, yes, these interventions are crazy. They're also technically pilot data, meaning it's a small sample and it's sort of a feasibility trial to generate sample size calculations for future studies that would really be able to measure the influence of this. So, we can't have two groups of 9 and then say, hey, everybody, this works. But what people will do is these pilot studies say, yes, this is feasible, and now let's go out and do the real major clinical trial. When you do a pilot study, you're not supposed to run statistical comparisons to say these are our results. They're supposed to be generating just to see how many people do I need for the major trial. Unfortunately, the authors of some of these papers did that anyway, and the internet is just running with it.
And then you have podcasters and people with the appearance of authority, including some people with PhDs, who will grab onto this stuff, roted data, and present it as though it were, hey, these are these big, strong studies, and it's almost factual.
Absolutely. I think we see time and time again these days leaning into inappropriate literature, but like presenting it as science. We're framing it as, oh, we're really evidence-based. Here's my PubMed ID. Here's my green screen with the study in the back, and I'm talking about this. But one thing that I think the public doesn't fully understand is the difference between types of studies. So we have a clinical trial or an interventional study, meaning we are going to try to control for as many things as we possibly can. We're going to change something and then choose an outcome and see what is the effect of the thing we changed on that outcome. Maybe it's muscle growth, maybe it's strength, maybe it's fat loss, maybe it's some other parameters of health. And then we have review papers, which are essentially literature reviews of other studies. So the authors have a lot of freedom there to choose the studies that they would like to cite and to discuss the state of the literature. These aren't bad. They're good because typically the goal is to say, hey, this is we're synthesizing this and we propose that we study this, this, and that in the future. And, let's share it with the scientific community. Unfortunately, when there's these narrative reviews that are citing this rodent data or this mechanistic data, and the title of it is something like, the influence of X on body composition, or what you should know about nutrition for women, or something like that, then people are taking it as science, as data, when it doesn't actually address the question that would support what the influencer or science communicator is saying. So if I am going to make a claim about calories in, calories out don't work for women, then I need to show you a study where women were in a calorie deficit and they lost no weight from the calorie deficit. Whereas the men who were in the study lost weight from the calorie deficit and everything was tightly controlled. That study doesn't exist. That data isn't there. And so people are just then throwing in these narrative reviews that discuss this literature that's not applicable to humans.
Are there any downsides to using a weighted vest? Let's say someone's like, hey, I love my weighted vest. You alluded to I think you were the sacrifice, right? But yeah.
Well, okay. I see a utility for a weighted vest if, let's say, you're maybe newer to lifting and you have some grip strength issues and you want to do something like squats and lunges with a weighted vest. I think that's fine. But there are other exercises where a weighted vest isn't doing anything for you. So if you are benching, it's not helping. And you laugh, but there are people who are doing this online. And for walking, it's just not useful. If it's going to make you go for a walk, cool. I'd rather you go for the walk than not go for the walk. But, summer's coming up. It's going to be hot out. The weighted vests are pretty uncomfortable. In a lot of the studies, people say, I got back pain. It was really difficult to put on or difficult to take off. And so I just view it as more of a barrier or something that people are going to purchase, use for 2 weeks, and then put in the closet and never touch again. That said, anything that is going to encourage you to be physically active is cool with me.
Okay, great answer. What will help people, especially perimenopausal, postmenopausal women, with their bone health?
The unfortunate truth is there is a huge genetic component to this. And so there are people who have been really physically active for their whole adult lives, and they will still face challenges with low bone density. We build our bone mass primarily in development. And so when you're in your 20s, our bone mass is peaking. And so it's really more about attenuating the loss than it is trying to build more bone. That said, being active, lifting weights is really effective. Weight-bearing aerobic exercise is effective. Doing a combination of the two is effective. Just being overall physically active is going to be beneficial. I am a big proponent of weightlifting because we have the benefits of on the muscle side as well as the bone benefits. So then we don't actually need bone-specific recommendations and muscle-specific recommendations. So if you can get people to do some resistance training, I think it can be hugely beneficial. The other thing is the reason we are concerned about bone mineral density is really because as a predictor for fracture risk. And if we don't fall, we don't fracture. So being a more muscular person makes you a more, I hate to use this word, but functional person, because, we are going to be able to just perform those daily activities. We're less likely to get injured. You can catch yourself. You're able to move through full ranges of motion under load. So there's just so many benefits there.
If anybody's really interested in this topic, my friend Robert Linkle was on, and Lauren, I don't know if you know Robert. Robert is the authority in training older adults, but we did a lot on strength training benefits, reducing fall risk. It went really heavy to that. So anybody listening who wants that, go back to the Robert Linkle episode, message me, I'll send it to you. It covers this in depth. Are there any other pieces of menopause misinformation that makes you, again, want to throw your phone across the room? Stuff that is really concerning to you?
I hope I didn't just say anything that contradicted what Robert said.
Nope. Listen, Robert is amazing. You have greater credentials than even Robert does, I promise you. But no, it lined up exactly with what he said, right? Where the evidence lies.
Good to hear. And I will also say that if you have clinically low bone density, there are medications that can be really helpful. And so see an endocrinologist. That is definitely a viable strategy in addition to doing your physical activity. Other menopause myths that are bothering me. Yes, that because you are peri or post-menopause, you either can't do zone 2 or You must do HIIT or sprint interval training. There's a lot of weird mixed messaging around, never go for a walk or never do lower intensity jogging because, you must do this higher intensity stuff. I hate this message because, as I said during our weighted vest discussion, all physical activity is good. Whatever you're going to do consistently is positive, is health promoting. And so there is absolutely no evidence that one is better than the other for fat loss. Frankly, they're both not great. If you want fat loss, you need a calorie deficit, and we want to look at your diet. But there are health benefits of both. And so do what you prefer and do what you will do consistently.
I almost forgot about jumping, because you mentioned jumping in impact when it came to bone mineral density. And this is one of those things, again, where kind of like the weighted vest, like I was kind of a little bit more bullish. I am actually still kind of bullish because I personally feel like, and I guess it's dose dependent, but could you elaborate on where's the research lying? What do you think about jumping, skipping, things that have a bit of impact as it relates to bone, let's say attenuation, even if it can't necessarily build it very effectively?
So there is a study that honestly, the bone research is tough because a lot of them are not designed in a way that we can tease out the effect of one thing from the effect of another. For example, the bone research is really difficult because in some cases we can't tease out the effect of one intervention from another. So a good example of this is a study where a group lifted heavy weights. I believe they did squats and deadlifts, and they also did hard landing jumps, meaning they were holding on to a pull-up bar and then they were trying to jump with your legs as straight as possible. So not a typical exercise that you see in the gym. And then the group that they compared it to was doing this sort of at home, really low load, kind of 2-pound weight and stretching intervention. And so this really fueled the narrative that heavy weights are a must for bone, or that jumping was a must for bone. The problem with how some of this has been translated is that those hard landing jumps are probably a good stimulus for bone. But when we start doing plyometric type training, when we're landing in that deep squat, the muscles and the connective tissue is absorbing a lot of that impact. And it's not just the bone. And so I think that might explain why the data is a bit mixed. The other thing I'll say about bone is adaptations take a really long time. So when we're trying to look at fat loss or muscle growth, we can do a study that's 3 months, 4 months, and expect to actually see some results that are reliable. When we try to do research in bone, we really need longer term studies. And so that's why we're just not in the same place about being able to make strong recommendations. And there's a paper that came out, I believe, last month in Nature, and it was kind of this network meta-analysis trying to compare the different interventions. And it's just so tough because they're so different in the type of intervention and the length of the studies and the actual outcomes that they measured and all these other variables about the participant. It's really hard to start to compare these studies. And so that's why I say, if you like plyos and jumping, then awesome, do it. But if you hate it, I don't think you have to do it.
I think the underlying theme to all this is stay active and expose yourself to progressive, challenging things that it hits a sweet spot where it's hard enough that it forces adaptation. It's enough of a stimulus to cause you to adapt, not so much that it overwhelms your ability to recover. Right? And that's going to be really relevant to jumping. I think with jumping or anything like that, if you're not used to doing it or sprinting, I know that Stuart McMillan was on a very popular podcast recently, and he talked extensively about this and some bounding and skipping. And I thought, oh, this is brilliant. And I'm 47, so I'm like, okay, I actually want to incorporate some of this. But what I do, really titrated, like a little bit of a dose, felt good. The person who goes out and goes all out, who hasn't done this stuff, who's around my age or older, guess what? You're going to get yourself hurt. You just will. So graduate your exposure, your intensities to it. And as you notice, you're getting stronger, but it's classic progressive overload in training. Just apply that to like every other active stimulus you're going to do. I think that's probably the wisest thing.
100%. And pick something and stick to it for long enough, because if you're constantly kind of bouncing around, then there's adherence issues with that. So I think if we think about, okay, I'm going to start lifting weights and then I'm going to start feeling really comfortable about those movement patterns and my form, and then I can increase the load, and then I'm excited to see the progress that I'm making week after week, whether it's strength gains or changes in the way my clothes fit. And so there's something about that journey that is going to encourage you to continue doing it, as opposed to just constantly switching things up and going to this one class and then, trying this other online workout. And, like I said, anything's better than nothing, but I do think there's something to be said about finding something you genuinely enjoy and do it consistently and progressively.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Lauren Colenso-Semple. This was brilliant. One of my favorite interviews ever. There's a reason why your media is doing so well. Everybody can follow you on Instagram at Dr. Lauren CS1. That's Dr. Lauren CS1. What else would you like to direct people to?
If anyone is interested in comprehensive breakdowns of research, check out Mass Research Review. And if you're in for a lighthearted chat about fitness headlines, I'm doing a podcast called Front Page Fitness with my friend and colleague, Eric Trexler.
Eric Trexler, I met him at the Inland Empire Fitness Conference where he spoke several years ago. And great guy, smart, sarcastic, self-deprecating humor at its finest. And so, yeah, a great resource as well. Lauren, thank you. This has been a pleasure. Everybody listening, take this. There is going to be someone in your world who needs this episode. This is one of the ones I want to push out. There's so much in here that's going to help so many people. So just take it in a DM, text message to a friend, family member. Help me get this out in front of more people, get more people following Lauren. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.